Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our Sabbath School. We are glad to have you on this journey with us. We are joined here with my wife, Sandra, and Jessica and Camden. And we are going to be diving into chapter 85 of The Desire of Ages. But before we do that, and this will give me a chance to sort out some tech in the background, can we just go around? How was your week? What was one challenge that you managed to overcome this week? There's my question. That's what I'm starting with. Okay, I shall nominate. I nominate Jessica to start us.
One challenge. I think the challenge for me was to take a step back and understanding that not everybody is what I am in my faith. It's just that's why I felt like sometimes we focus or we try to understand other people, but sometimes doesn't matter how hard we try, we're not in the same page, and to let it go. Not try to fix anything, not try to, it's just let it go. And understand that it's okay if we're not in the same page. That was my challenge this week.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
I think my challenge was trying to disconnect from the world and all that is happening. And I don't say disconnect in the way that I don't care anymore, but it was eating me up and I was getting so engulfed in it that I felt like it was getting to a point where I couldn't function. Because every minute I was just like checking, what's going on. And then I check it and then my emotions, erupt again. And then it makes me numb or upset. It was just putting me in a lot of negative energy going on. And so I've been trying, failed at times, but I tried this week to disconnect as much as possible. And that was hard. And that's still hard even this morning to do. But I think, that was a challenge that I'm still working on.
Yep.
I think my challenge this week was actually work related. I work at the local high school and elementary school, and we had some snow days this week. And so being the athletic director, I'm in charge of all the events that happen, sports related. And so I was trying to reschedule games, cancel games, communicate with parents on things. And so we were able to reschedule one game for yesterday at 2:00. And so it was just kind of chaotic trying to figure out all of that and time with the other schools, but we made it happen. So
cool. What's my challenge? I think my challenge this week was trying to remain patient. In trying to remain patient in that the progress that I yearn for. Maybe I'm not ready for it yet. And maybe that's something that I just need to just trust in God. I think that's my challenge this week. Okay, with that, without further ado, we're going to dive into our chapter that we have read. We've been reading chapter 85. I'm going to give a quick synopsis, dive into some questions and some thoughts, and give our honest feedback. I hope you online are going to join us on this journey. If you want, if you go to the description in the YouTube, you'll see all the questions listed out, and we're going to try and work through them and see if we get to some of them. Apologize if we can't get to all of them, but we'll do our best and we'll see. And you never know, some weird and wonderful new questions might pop up as we have this discussion together. Okay, so this chapter is based on John chapter 21. It's the last chapter in the book of John. And just to paint the picture, the disciples are a bit frustrated and hurt. Jesus has died and he has since resurrected, but there's a real feeling of uneasiness as they all sit there in this room. And then Simon Peter decides, I'm going to go fishing. So he takes the rest of his disciple. Well, the other disciples say they're going to follow him. And you got this band of disciples going down to the water's edge. They get into a boat and they push the boat off onto the Sea of Galilee, as most of them who are fishermen are quite well versed and know how to handle the seas and stuff. And as you have this image of the disciples going out into the middle of the water, and as they head out into the middle of the water, they fish and fish and fish. All night they fish and they don't catch a single fish. They're dejected, they're demoralized, they're really quite challenged. And by the end of it, they're about to head back into shore. As they head back into shore, they see a figure on the coastline who's waving their hands at them, trying to get their attention, asking, "Did you catch any fish?" "No, we didn't catch any fish." And then this figure responds back and says, "Cast your net on the right-hand side of the boat." Obviously, that sends up alarm bells, because we know who said that in the early stages when the disciples first came to follow Jesus, especially Simon Peter, where Jesus specifically said to Simon Peter, "Cast your net on the right-hand side of the boat." And as the story goes, they follow this stranger who calls out to them on that shoreline. They cast their net on the right-hand side and fish just come from every single direction. They haul in as much as they can. They get close to the shore, pull in the fish, and eventually, actually, Simon Peter, while he was out on the shore, recognizes it was Jesus, and in a flurry of emotion, jumps into the water, swims towards Jesus. And then Jesus tells him to go and help the rest of the boys to bring in the fish. They sit around a fire and have breakfast together. Then Jesus has this infamous conversation where he pulls Simon Peter aside, walks with him on the beach. And here's where we have the famous 3 times Jesus asks him, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And then Simon Peter responds in each fashion. There's our synopsis. It's probably a well-known story, I think, at least among those who understand Simon Peter's story. But it was nice to get that recollection through Ellen White's eyes and her perspectives and her views. So here's the first question. Why didn't the disciples recognize Jesus at first? And what might this teach us about how we see Christ in our daily lives? Who wants to start us off and give us a crack at that one?
I think it was mainly because, just thinking about it, Jesus had just passed away, you know, and I guess they, even though Jesus had told them that he will rise again and all of this, I don't think that sank in for them. And so, because to them, in their human nature, when someone's dead, they're dead, right? And so I think that could be a big part of it, that they were just not expecting him to be there, because to them he had passed, they'd mourned him, and all of that. So and then
he had resurrected, and he had showed himself to them before, but it's probably weird because they're probably trying to wait, is he really dead? Or is he alive? Is he does that, and they're probably going through maybe a state of shock, I imagine.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, because I mean, even if someone had told me that the person I just saw passed away is alive and walking somewhere, I think it would be very, very weird for me to believe that they are actually alive, My first thought would be like, okay, sure, maybe this person has been hallucinating or something of that sort. But I think the most important part is the thing that even though Jesus had prepared them, it didn't sink in for them. They didn't actually internalize the fact that he was actually going to rise again, because they probably didn't believe it, right? And stuff. Otherwise, they would have known immediately, because he had told them that he was going to rise. And I think in our daily lives, that's what stands out to me, in the fact that we know a lot about the Bible. Unlike them, we know the whole story, and a lot of things that God has told us, we've learned through reading and hearing and all of that. But if we're not attentive, if we don't let it sink in, or if we just simply don't believe it, it will come and it will pass us, and we would not even recognize it, or it will mean absolutely nothing to us, or it will come as a shock to us, and then we will not be prepared for whatever it is that's going on. So I think that's the first thing that pops.
Yeah, thanks for that. Anyone else?
No, I agree with what Sandra said. That was my thought. That my personal opinion is that they didn't recognize him at first because it's like they were not expecting to see him. They were like focused on what they're going through the night, not being able to fish, like expectations. And despite they were like so close, getting close to him, they still didn't recognize him. And it can apply also to our daily lives when we forget to have faith, if that can be like say that way, that we're so wrapped up in what's going on with ourselves or with our lives that we forget to take a break and remember that God is there.
Yeah. Camden, any thoughts?
I agree. They just weren't expecting to see him. I mean, they were frustrated. They hadn't caught anything yet. So I think they just weren't in the right headspace, if that makes sense. But what shocks me about it is how they didn't recognize his voice. After spending so much time with him and everything like that, that's just kind of what surprises me the most, because they could have been at a distance where they wouldn't really recognize his features or whatnot. But to not recognize his voice, I think, is what surprises me after the countless hours they had spent with him.
I guess it's amazing how you can be blinded to things that you should recognize by fear, expectations, worry, confusion, whatever it is. Like those kinds of things really disorientate what you should notice. But I think we can easily become so distracted that we don't recognize Jesus in plain sight in different spaces. And that can definitely happen because we're just welled up with emotion. And I think that is very true. You know, I'll express and say that, you know, it's a challenging time for me. And as we watch the news and we see all that's taking place, not just here in America, but across the world, it's just every 2 seconds, my phone is popping up, breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. And sometimes it's very difficult where you get lost in the emotional response rather than, well, I'm going to say it, I think the expectation of seeing Jesus. Because sometimes you're so overwhelmed with the Jesus is not here that you lose sight of the Jesus is. At least that's for me in terms of, you know, I don't think I blame the disciples for not being able to see Jesus. I think they just exhibit a very real human thing that we all have to face in some way. I don't know. Do you ladies think that Jesus was disappointed in maybe their lack of faith or their inability to see him? Do you think Jesus is disappointed with us?
I mean, I think so. I think he could get disappointed or frustrated just by the example in the church, right? When he saw people misusing his father's temple and, you know, gambling and doing all of that in the church. So I think he definitely gets frustrated at our behaviors sometimes, you know, but I think also the powerful side of that is also his ability to forgive and his ability to know human nature, and he already knows our response. So even though it might be painful for him to watch us go through all of that, I think he knows our human nature, and knowing that he knows the future, he had probably anticipated it, you know, and I think unlike us, he's more patient. I like to think, at least. you know,
Yeah.
than we are, and maybe his frustrations might come in a different light than ours might. And I think as you were speaking, one thing that came is that we might also be missing the point even right now, because I think these are all things that we've been aware of, of the wars and the pestilence and the pain and everything that the Bible says is going to come. Like, we're living a part of that now, and we're seeing the world change as a part of that now. All the leaders that will come, he's talked about that. But you are right in the sense that we get caught up in our emotions and we forget the fact or the reality. It doesn't mean that we don't feel it, but now as you're talking, I was wondering, with the knowledge that we have about all these things that are going to happen in the world, how do we use that to reconcile actually living in it? Do we just say, oh, God said it was going to come anyways, or, it was prophesied in the Bible that all these things are going to happen. And so we throw our hands in the air and says, well, let's let it just happen. And God comes and clears it. We don't care, type of thing. Or do we become a part of it, seeking the change? Or I think the part where at least I'm at is like, how do we reconcile the knowledge with the reality that we're living in? Of course, we have faith and we trust God, but how does that trust show itself in our daily lives, in more like tangible ways? At least that was my thought and stuff when you were speaking.
I've got a follow-up question, but before I do that, Jessica Camden, did you want to weigh in, respond?
I think I could see him being disappointed that we just aren't able to recognize him in certain situations or in our daily life. But I think he also definitely knows our hearts. And so I think he knows where we are. And so with that, I think that helps a bit. And he knows our nature, us as humans. And so we're not always in the right headspace or looking for him in the little things. And it can get easy for us to get caught up in other things. But as I mentioned, I think he knows our hearts. And so I think that kind of helps kind of tamper any disappointment, if that makes sense, which I mean, him as our father, disappointment is going to happen in us with our nature as humans. But ultimately, I think he just knows our hearts. So I know, anyways, yeah, he just knows our hearts. So I think that helps.
So here's my follow-up question, and it's a question to myself as well. Is it enough for you to know that Jesus is on the shore and not in your boat?
I want him in the boat.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. I definitely would love him to be in the boat all the time. And by that, I mean, I'm like, God, I trust you. May your will be done. And he steps in and just turns it where he wants it to go and says, gives me all the peace, be still, and gives me all the, like calms me immediately and takes care of whatever is going on. Like, I want him to lead me in that way. But I think we just have to accept the reality that sometimes our faith will need to take us further than that, where just knowing that he is there with us should be enough. Because he is not that kind of father, he's not that kind of leader. I don't see him as a micromanaging type in a way where he's also giving us the ability to make decisions and choice, right? And so I think we need to learn to make that enough, right? Yeah, but I think we want both the best of both worlds, in that we want him to come in and take it and drive it, but at the same time we also want our freedom and our what do you call it, autonomy, right? And so I think we only want him to be in the boat when we're struggling or when it's really painful, but when things are good, we're just like, you're good there,
Yes.
like that. And so I think we can't have both worlds, basically, and we just have to have our faith carry us.
When you asked that question, and then Sandra, my mind went where yours did, with choice, because God wants us to make our own choices. And so I think there are definitely instances where he needs to be in the boat with us, and he is in the boat with us. But I think by him being on the shore, he's able to take a step back, and we still know he's there and still guiding us and helping us, but we're able to make our own decisions, which is what he wants for us as humans. He wants us to be able to choose him and make our own decisions. And so he's not dictating our life per se. And by him being in the boat, that doesn't mean he's dictating our life. But I think by him being able to be on the shore, we have to fully trust him and still trust ourselves to be able to make the right decisions and trust him in all that we do.
That's a hard one when you also said we have to trust ourselves, because I don't know if that's always wise for me. But I do think that that is the nature of how graceful God is. I think you're right. He does want us to trust ourselves, even though trust in ourselves can be quite flawed, because I think he wants to show us that he can work with those flaws. I think it's him being on the shore is so symbolic because we feel uncomfortable with that. But yeah, I think sometimes I think there's a fallacy of us kind of, having this rhetoric of God, do everything for me, make my decisions, intervene,
Make it better.
yeah, or even just we stay away from that language, but what we really mean kind of sometimes is, Lord, possess me, so that take over, take full control. But there is a beautiful and interesting part of this story where it's so symbolic. You have these disciples in the boat by themselves, struggling to find fish. And then you have this Jesus on the shore, guiding and instructing them after they have failed. And I think that speaks to a God who wants us to fail.
No. Well,
Do you think he wanted the disciples to go out and not catch fish that night?
well, I guess me knowing the kind of God I want to know, right? So I don't know if this is the truth or not, but I think it would be painful for me to feel like God intentionally wants us to fail. He allows it to happen, but I don't think it's his desire that we fail. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That when reality hits, he can allow it to happen, because if he didn't allow it, then he will always be intersecting, right? But I don't think he desires for us to be miserable, for us to fail, and for us to not see him. But that is the nature of sin, right? That is what happened when sin came, that failure and pain and all of those things became part of our lives. And I don't think, looking at the creation story, that it was ever his desire to include the pain and all of that in that. But after the sin, that just became the reality. And we just have to kind of trust that we're living in our reality of sin and pain and all of that. He allows it to happen. And when it gets to a point where he knows that, there's other choices, he directs us to do it. Now, when he told the disciples, cast it, was it to the right or to the left?
Right.
To the right. They had a choice, right? They had to decide to say, oh yeah, let me listen to this voice and put it to the right. At that time, I think they still hadn't recognized him yet, right? And so we have to make that decision to follow Jesus's steps in order to get the results that he desires for us. So he could be instructing us all along, and we could also just be jetting off in our own direction, not listening to what he's saying, which is going to continue to cause us more pain when we try to figure it out on our own. I guess my thing is, I want the desire to get to the point where I can actually hear his voice and hear the direction and the trust to follow it, without hesitation, without question.
Yeah, that's quite salient. Jessica, how do you think God views failure?
I was listening to Sandra, and I don't know. To me, so I want to be totally honest with you. Recently, I have been struggling when it comes to my faith. Like, are you there? Are you seeing this?
Mm.
So it's just like I'm in that point of like, I want to believe that you are there, and that you care.
Mhm.
But it is hard. It's challenging. It's like questioning. Like, I think I'm like there with the disciples right now, like on the boat. I don't see you. I don't hear you. You're not here. I don't see you here in the boat. But that's humanity. But in my human nature, it's just like, where are you? Are you there? Are you gone? Can you see all of this? That's where I am as today. I think I'm in the boat with them. Like, I don't see you, I don't hear you, I don't recognize you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that he was maybe mad at them. I think he kind of like let them, what it was said, like give them time to process, to actually like, oh, you're there,
Mm-hmm.
and to show them that I am here. And even if you're still on the boat and I'm on this side, I'm still taking care of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, it is, as human beings, it is hard when you have like a lot of emotions going on. That's what I think.
I'm intrigued to ask Camden what she thinks about failure because she's a teacher. I want to know what that looks like from your lens and your viewpoint.
Mhm. Yeah, when you ask that question, I mean, I would love to think that God doesn't set us up for failure or necessarily want us to fail. But just, yeah, I guess as a teacher and as a coach, as I'm on the court with my athletes or anything like that, obviously I want us to succeed. I want us to win, do whatever. I want my students to succeed. But any mistakes, any failures, if you will, anything like that is where we grow. And so if we don't make mistakes, if we don't ever have disappointments or ever have any trials or anything like that, we're not going to be able to grow. And so, as we mentioned earlier about choice, I think God wants us to make our choices. Not that He wants us to fail, but He wants us to be able to make choices, learn about that choice, and then use that forward to be able to grow. Because if we're not able to make mistakes, have failures, anything like that, we're not going to be able to make changes moving forward or necessarily learn and grow from our choices. And so, like I said, I would like to think He doesn't set us up for failure per se, but since He does allow us to make our choices, I think it just gives us an avenue to be able to grow, and both in our, daily lives, our spiritual lives, maybe even at work or like with my athletes on the court, to make them a better athlete or a better teammate or anything like that. And so, I guess that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing very much a case of it's hard, but we somehow need to live with the acceptance of there will be nights where you do not catch any fish.
Mhm.
And I think that changes the way that we're able to navigate this world. Just the acceptance that those nights come. And those nights don't, but those nights don't come without Jesus still being there. Those nights are very, and I mean, I'm always going to be shocked when stuff happens, personally, globally, whatever it is. But I think living with that expectation is, at least in this version of life, in this world before Jesus comes, is something that is fundamental towards having the capacity to be able to go through it. And I think that's super necessary. But these are big challenges. These are big challenges for all of us to face as we navigate this space. I want to try and shift the tone a bit. We're going to head towards this epic conversation that Simon Peter has with Jesus. They're having breakfast. They sit down, and Simon Peter's wanting to have probably a conversation with Jesus, and Jesus has this. I just picture him sort of just like sitting across from the fire and going, "All right, come, let's go." And they're walking off together. It's not some romantic sunset walk. It's a walk filled with tension. It's a walk filled with all kinds of uncomfortable feelings. I'm picturing Simon Peter probably having nightmares every night about the cockerel crowing 3 times in his head, going over and over again. And then he has this conversation with Jesus, and Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And 3 times Peter responds. So here's the next question. Why do you think Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And what might this repetition mean for Peter and for us? Who wants to start us off?
I have a thought. I heard this sometimes a long time ago, that when they say that he asked him 3 times, it was because he wanted to reassure him, or like he denied Jesus 3 times to kind of like we're good, you know what I mean? Like it was a long time ago. I can't actually remember, but it was like the opportunity of rendition, to say like, you deny me 3 times, but I'm asking you to reassure you, do you love me? It wasn't like Jesus didn't know, he knew. It was like, do you love me? 3 times, the same way he denied him 3 times.
Yeah,
I didn't think of it that way before.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is that Jesus knew, but he wanted him, like the emphasis, he wanted it to sink in for Peter, right? Because if he just asked, "Do you love me?" and it's like, "Yes, I do." You know, sometimes you just say it, it happens and it's gone. But when the person's as a second time, then you start thinking, why are you asking me? And then you start wondering to yourself, wait, do I? You know, and then it goes deeper. And then the third time you actually kind of pause, you know, and think, do I actually love him like I say I do?
Or you get frustrated that they keep asking.
Yeah. But even in that frustration, it makes you think later, how deep is my love for God, you know, in that sense. So that's how I've always seen that question. I always thought about it, that he, even though God knew, he wanted Peter to think about it and to come to his own realization, whether he does or not, right? And then I think is the conversation that follows that. It's like, you know, feed my sheep, do this. And I think Jesus wanted him to understand that he was going to do that work out of the love he has for him, despite, like Jessica says, him denying him, and that he's choosing him, and it's not a choice. It's not a random choice. He's choosing him because he understands he loves him, right? And that's how I see the connection over there.
What do you think, Kendall?
I mean, when I think about this story, definitely the parallel of the 3. So Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And so there's a little parallel there. I think also the significance of the 3, even and when you think of it, when Peter denied Jesus 3 times, like if I think when someone asks us a question and we are dishonest or lie about something, and they ask us in that same instance again and again, I feel like it's harder for us to lie or deny the more they ask. And I think in our nature, if we lie in general, the more we lie, the easier it gets. But I think in that instance, we start to second guess ourselves and be like, should I actually tell the truth, or what should I do here? And so I think that three is important there. And I think also when Jesus was asking Peter, like, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? I think it was a little against Peter's nature, per se, to take that so calmly. And I believe Peter was a little hurt by that, especially after reading the chapter. And so as I think Sandra mentioned earlier, it's easy to get frustrated when someone is asking you something over and over again. And I know I myself get like that, even if it's not in that same instance, like if it's like a few days down the road and it's like, really, we just had the same conversation. Did you just not believe me? Did you just not care enough to remember? And so I think Peter, instead of getting frustrated, he gets actually a little hurt. Like, Lord, you know my heart. Like, what do you mean? Why you keep on asking me this? And so I don't know. I'd like to think that by the third time Jesus asked him, that Peter sees the parallel of the threes. And so I hope he does. I also thought it was interesting in the chapter that Ellen White says that if a sin is private, then we should talk to God about it in private and repent in private. But if a sin was public, and I think Peter denying Jesus was public, right? And so then you have to repent publicly. And so I thought that was interesting as well. I don't think I had ever, thought of it that way, that Jesus might have wanted Peter to repent in a similar way in public. And so I thought that was a little interesting as I was reading.
Yeah. And I think now that you say that, my question then is like, what is the significance of like repenting in public if a sin was public? And I guess, yeah, that's the question that I'm thinking about right now, because I guess in public, our sins do affect other people, right? Because people saw it, people experienced it. And sometimes I think we don't think about that. So that stood out to me too. And I felt like because we are a community and public sins do affect others, repenting publicly gives those people also opportunity to either forgive or move on or settle whatever misunderstanding, whatever thoughts they were having in their mind as well. So that's quite powerful.
Yeah, it got me thinking, does God need to ask us 3 times if we love him? And to me, the conversation, I'm just gonna say, I think Jesus he came across quite robust and not hostile, just I think he attacked Simon Peter's thoughts, because every time that Jesus asked Simon Peter, do you love me? I heard, you don't love me. That's what I heard. And maybe that's just me projecting my own self, but I do see myself in the same kind of instance where God is asking me, do you love me? And maybe he's trying to interrogate my life even further to say, well, if you say that you love me, then why don't all your actions marry up to that belief or that declaration or whatever it is? And the reality is I keep falling short. So that's one way. One way is to receive it in a very negative kind of I have no self-esteem kind of thing, where I'm just like
defensiveness.
Yeah, very defensive, very, very sort of just like, I'm unworthy, I'm this, I'm that, and the other. And to some degree, there is an element of truth to that perspective of me receiving that. And then there is the other side where you could argue that Jesus was trying to convince him that you do love me. You might think you don't, because your life doesn't marry up with your principles, but you do love me. And I want you to know and keep saying it and keep repeating it, because this is something that you can attest to. You can say that you love me and still live life as a hypocrite. Like you're I'm not condoning hypocrisy.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to say that there is a duality of you can deny Jesus and still follow him. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of Christian circles to accept that in practice. And I want to be clear here. I'm not trying to say that Jesus is condoning or asking us to live a life of denial as we follow him. But I think he wants us to be aware that that duality exists, and our discomfort is proof that we're following Jesus. I think.
Yeah.
Next question.
Mhm.
Our next question is, what does it mean to feed my lambs and feed my sheep in practical terms today? And are we doing this? This is a response to when Simon Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, I love you," 3 times. And then Jesus says, "I want you to feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, and feed my sheep." The 3 things. What do you take that to mean? How do you understand that?
I've been reflecting on that question because the first time I read the question, my first thought was, she talks about making disciples and stuff like that. Then I say, no, she's saying, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. And then I start thinking that he means support my lambs, like take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Is this he talking about that? Like, it's not just like I'm calling you to be a disciple and bring people. I'm also calling you to take care of them. Take care of my sheep, my lambs. And what do you do when you do that? How do you take care of them? By providing them the stuff they need, by support. It could be like with humans, emotional support. That's creating community. That's what my mind went through. Like, because first I was thinking, oh, disciples, creating disciples. But then I was like, no, he's saying feed them. And I start thinking, like, what if I have some kind of like, I have pets, an example, and I'm taking care of them. And if I have to feed them, I have to take care of them, I have to emotionally play with them, like make a safe space for them. So when I think about feeding them, I think about us community. It's to take care of one another, or take care of, you know what I mean? I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. And I think as you were talking, what's come into my mind is the fact that, it's interesting because the sheep were already there. In order to feed them, they had to be there, right? He didn't say, bring the sheep in. He didn't say, go find sheep, like you're saying in the disciple thing. He said, feed them, which means the people are already there. And they need to be, in that instance, at least, because I know there's a part where he tells them to go make disciples, right? At that point, he was very intent on that. But here it feels like he has already provided the sheep. He has already provided the lambs. They just need, like you're saying, the feeding and the support, whatever that translates into. That's interesting. Yeah.
I guess I tend to focus, which I guess it makes sense with what I do, but on the feed my lambs part. I guess that just speaks to me a little bit, especially just thinking about, I guess, my students, because I love my students and I want them to succeed and I want them to follow the plan that God has for them. And so I've been able to go to 2 of my students' baptisms. And so that's just lovely to see their commitment to God. But when you think about it as well, like the future of the church is with our young people. And so I think the feeding my lamb part is very significant in that. And I've heard, people talk about that, like the future of the church is with the young people and things like that. So I think we have to train them up and give them everything they need in order to choose where they stand and choose how they view God and kind of develop their own ideas of who God is and how to serve him, how to follow him. And so I guess I just tend to focus on that part, the feed my lambs.
I just realized something that I haven't realized before. So Peter and Paul later on in the New Testament have their own kind of marching orders. And Paul is sent to the Gentiles, and then Peter is sent to the Jews.
Mm.
And it's really interesting that he says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my lambs, and how he mentions that the sheep were already there. Because it just turned on a light bulb, and I realized to myself, Jesus was trying to mobilize Simon Peter to recognize there is a way that you need to teach the current flock so that they can become the missional centers of peace for the Gentiles in the world and all they interact with. I think this is pretty sound. I think that Jesus was trying to guide Simon Peter to teach the us, the ones that are familiar, the ones that know, the ones that are around, the ones that you don't need to spend time convincing them that God is real, or you don't, I'm sure there's a time and a place for that for other people, but I think that this could be a hint where Jesus was preparing Simon Peter for the difficult work of inside the system and not outside the system. Inside the system, which is exhausting sometimes, is the call for us to disciple people, young and not so young, to effectively care for the rest of this world. I don't know. Does that resonate?
I think for me, like as you're speaking, what's coming up? Two things. I had never actually sat to think about it that way. That Camden brought it up. I always read lamb, sheep, but it didn't, occur to me the difference between the young and the old, and it's just how rounded God is, how detailed he is in his steps, right? And just the fact that he wanted to take care of everybody in the circle, right? So he wanted to take care of the adults, he wanted to take care of the young people, he didn't leave anyone out, right? And then to kind of bring it on to the fact that Paul went to the Gentiles and Peter went to the Jews. That makes sense because the Jews were already there, and it's like all you have to do is take care of the people who are already here, not just the adults, but the young people as well, right? And then Paul's mission was to go to the people who had not heard it before. Another way that's showing me how detailed God is in his approach, because it's like he has made provision for every aspect of humanity, where he has, not all of us are meant to be evangelist on the pulpit to the world, right? He has placed that passion in very specific people's hearts to go out to the world outside of the system, as you say. And at the same time, he has also commissioned some of us, or put it on our hearts, to care for the system. Because sometimes I think we all only think about the outside of the system. We need to go out, we need to go out, we need to go out. And we forget about the people we currently have, the people that are already here, the sheep that are already believing. We forget that they also need tending, they also need care and stuff. And I love the fact that he has people that he's given the mission to go out based on their own story, because Paul has his own story that perhaps made him perfect for going out, and Peter has his own story that makes him perfect for taking care of those who are already in the faith. And just the fact that he hasn't forgotten us and he still sees us as people who still need him daily and need his care, and his put shepherds for that, I think.
And it's interesting that later on, Peter was actually sent to the Gentiles as well.
Oh, really?
And maybe this was like a preparing point for him to be able to move forward. But I will say this, that I am a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. And sometimes I struggle with that part of my identity, because as much as I know this church has done wonderful things, I think our church has also been complicit in many pains and difficult things. I don't think we've responded always in the best way. I don't think we have necessarily spoke where we need to speak up, and I don't think we've shown up in the spaces that we need to show up. I think we're a flawed church. We have ups, we have downs, we have problems, we have issues, systemic stuff, you name it. And I have been tempted many a times to forget this church. I'm just going to do this Jesus by myself, build my own community, go off and just, yeah. But I do feel that this particular story is a call to maybe all those who feel slightly, well, you fill in the gap. It could be exhausted, it could be tired, it could be whatever it is, who feel like that they don't want to contribute to the space that they are involved in, that there's work to do here. And it may go against your preference. It may go against your desire to be here. But if Peter's story is anything to learn from, because later on he did actually reach out to the Gentiles, and later on, because in my perspective, Peter was actually a racist, and God worked with him through that racism against the Gentiles. In order for Peter to be well-equipped, he had to do the work of investing in the current space. And I think this is a call for all those who identify themselves as a part of the church in some way, fashion, or form, is to kind of interrogate, as difficult as it is, what's my role here? What's my job here? What is it that God is requiring me to do in this space? As uncomfortable as that is. And anyway, that's what I feel. I definitely feel that. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
As you were mentioning about Peter, it reminded me of one of the paragraphs I had read, where Ellen White talks about how Peter was naturally forward and impulsive, and things like that, and how God asking Peter to take care of the lambs first. Not only is that the young people, it's those that were also kind of younger in faith. I think that's interesting as well, but it talks about how this kind of went against Peter and his nature, and how he would have to work on himself and learn to be gentle and all these other things in order to reach kind of this, what God wanted him to reach, as he said, lambs. And so I just thought that was interesting as I was reading, and then when you were talking, it kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. I'm trying to figure out which question I want to do. I think let's end with question 4. Let's actually end with question 4. At the end of John chapter 21, after all the dialogue and all these, Jesus and Peter going back and forth, do you love me, and all that kind of stuff, Jesus then does this very cryptic thing where at the end, he kind of prophesies how Peter is going to die in the end. And, history will tell us that he was crucified upside down, actually. And there's his romantic story, go all be Peters now. But the question that I'm asking is, in the knowledge of all of that, and as Jesus even tells Peter essentially what his life may look like as if he continues to follow Jesus. Jesus then bids to Peter, follow me. And so here's the question. Jesus told Peter, follow me, but also said Peter would die for his faith. What does it really mean to follow Jesus if it could cost us everything?
If I'm being honest, I don't think I fully follow Jesus for it to cost me everything. You know, I think if I'm being truly honest, I follow him because of what I can gain, or the future that is waiting for me in the story of heaven if I follow him, which is again what I could gain. And so I think it's very challenging to accept the fact that following Jesus could also mean or could also cost us everything, because there is numerous stories, you know, not just in the Bible, but out of that, of people who have died for their faith. And I guess it leaves me with a question. Am I there? You know, is that, can I be committed to that depth of love for God? Like if push came to shove right now in the history of, you know, Christianity and the torture and stuff that people have gone through, will I, like Peter, deny him 3 times to save myself?
Or would you say, take my husband and save me?
That might be sacrificing. You know, but it's a serious question, you know, that I think about. And whenever I think about that question, my answer is always 50-50. If I'm being honest, you know, it's like a part of me is like, yeah, I'm gonna stand up and just, you know, not give up. And another part of me is like, I might just pull myself to the back, you know, and just hide and try not to be seen as a follower, you know. So I guess that's the depth of my faith, sadly, you know.
Well, I don't think it's sad. Well, yeah, I'll make my comments in a minute. What about you two ladies?
I guess if I was Peter, I would have a hard time knowing that the mission I was tasked with, I would end up dying in a pretty painful way. And so I just feel like that would always be like kind of looming over my head and just always in the back of my mind. But I think also it could put a sense of urgency and just kind of be like, well, I need to do as much as I can with the time that I have. And so I guess knowing his end fate in a way could kind of maybe propel that in a way, I guess. And so maybe the sense of urgency was a good thing. But I just know that I myself, that would always be, I think, in the back of my mind. I mean, whether I was thinking about it or not, I just think it would always just be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Jess?
As I was listening to you guys, I was thinking about when we say, are you willing to sacrifice stuff for me? We are usually jumping to they're gonna persecute me, I'm gonna leave my house, like something really on the extreme side. But what if it's about the daily stuff?
What is about the daily?
What if it's
Your daily life, like friendships that don't align with the way you live your faith, the way you see God, the way that God has called you? Those are like stuff we lose in our daily life, or standing up for something that is right when no one else is doing it, or being patient with people, like, and being it is hard, like the way when you're going through your path on your faith, which is like every single person has their own path. To see as you progress and you grow, you lose people. And it's like it's not just about losing a job, losing a hard material stuff. It's also about losing relationships or being outcast for standing up or saying something and no one else agrees with you. You lose that comfort of feeling that you belong, to be accepted. I think that's another part that it comes when things that you will lose when you go through that. Would you work on your faith and with your relationship with God? That's how I see it, because I am currently living through it. Like,
thank you for sharing. It is time for us to wrap up. Unfortunately, I'm going to quickly just say this. I really loved Ellen White's response to this, where she says her perspective of Jesus saying, "Follow me," had a lot to do with follow me and don't go ahead of me, Peter. Where Ellen White was basically saying, if you go ahead of me, you will meet Satan alone. But if you follow me, then you have me. And I think that's one of the beautiful things. That's why I don't think your perspective is sad, because I think your perspective of recognizing your challenge of following him is all part of us following him and recognizing he can take the lead and we can take second fiddle. We're much stronger when we realize he takes number one in our lives. But anyway, we have to end. We could continue talking about this, but we want to thank you for joining us on this conversation, all those who are online. Thank you to my wonderful panel for being with us and to walking through this. We have church at 11:15 at Eastside SDA Fellowship. All the info you need is on our website, eastsidesda.org. But from us here, we are saying happy Sabbath. God bless you. And we will see you next week for another Sabbath School as we dive into chapter 86 of the Desire of Ages. God bless everyone. Bye.